Now, I'll start by perhaps just saying that insurance at its core is primarily a risk, data, and tech business. That is what insurance is all about. And it perhaps wouldn't be much hyperbole to say that there are few items that are value creating or destroying for the insurance industry than the forces at work around data, tech, and cloud. If you look at this slide and you notice the adoption rate that has accelerated dramatically across all countries, China being, of course, a primary huge accelerant in the recent decade, that this is not hyperbole. As Peter Diamandis notes, in the next decade, he says, we will experience more progress than in the past 100 years. Now, why is this? And if you actually look at some of the primary forces at work from our think tank, here are 10 that actually are primarily and hugely noteworthy. Process automation and virtualization, the future of connectivity, distributed infrastructure, so moving away from centralized computing to nodal computing and edge computing, next-gen computing, as many of you have read in newspapers and magazines, quantum computing can process data and numbers at a rate that is hugely and vastly superior to the technologies of today. Applied artificial intelligence, things like computer vision, natural language processing, speech technology. The future of programming, as one of the leaders at Google basically said, software that writes itself versus humans having to write software. Trust architecture, primarily underpinned by things like blockchain and distributed ledger technologies. And then, of course, there are industry-specific trends like biorevolution, next-gen materials like nanomaterials and things like that. And then, of course, as my colleague Silvan noted, sustainability and clean tech and the impact that this will have around it. And when you look at some of the impact characteristics of these 10 trends, they're quite staggering. In the next 10 to 30 years, it is entirely conceivable that 80% of the 7 to 8 billion, or whatever the population is by then, of the world would be reached by very fast 5G-like technology for connectivity. That essentially quantum computing will basically be largely at full scale by the middle of the next decade. So these are just gargantuan forces at work that will hugely impact this business that's centered around data, technology, and risk. And so then the point then is about why value creating and why value destroying. And this is the noteworthy thing. Companies that basically harness some of these forces around data, technology, and risk will end up creating new businesses much faster, will end up operating at a speed and agility that is remarkably superior to those that don't. The customer experience characteristics, it's been studied, will be vastly superior for those that use data and personalization versus those that don't. There's a complete rewiring of operating models that's possible, where labor will largely be substituted by technology and decision support using artificial intelligence and techniques like that. Those are companies that do this well, will create huge value. And on the converse side of it, companies that actually don't risk actually getting hugely left behind, leaving huge potential in terms of businesses they can create, leakage of talent, cyber risks that embed when you're not using some of these techniques and technologies powerfully. One of the things that actually, in particular, is this notion of cloud. There was a big debate for a long time whether financial services companies and insurance in particular would embrace technologies like public cloud. And if you look at the data, I think when we did a most recent survey, 80% of folks switched pre-COVID to basically saying they would never consider or would very unlikely to consider you going into a public cloud, to now the same survey says 80+% of CIOs and executives in the insurance industry basically say they are seriously, actively, or definitively considering using the public cloud. So a huge shift in just a matter of a couple of years, in fact. And as many of you know, this is reflected in the numbers that the industry sees. The industry is seeing a 30% plus per annum growth in terms of public cloud service revenues and adoption. So when I said at the beginning that it wouldn't be mere hyperbole to think about some of these forces at work being massively value creating or massively value destroying for the insurance industry, some of the early evidence would quite support that thesis. And obviously, there are already examples of big winners in insurance and people that are starting to use data and build an AI and artificial intelligence and decision support systems on top of that. And they're actually starting to see better loss ratios and improving trends in terms of loss ratios, distribution costs, and the like that underpin the primary economics of the insurance business.